This is episode number 162, part 2 of a 2-part series on how to become a better public speaker. If you want to sell more, connect better with an audience, listen up because that's what I'm talking about.
This is the Red Podcast. How to take your idea and make a name for yourself within your industry and beyond. Spread your message. Attract a following. Rise above the noise. Here's your host, David Hooper.
I've been doing public speaking, meaning me in front of a live audience, for quite a while. When I started my business, that was one of the first things that I did in order to grow it. I would go out every 3 or 4 weeks to do an event, not trying to get into the public speaking business, but simply to spread the message of what I was trying to do. And over that time, I've come across a lot of great advice. But in the past couple of weeks, as I've been putting together this episode and the previous episode, which is part 1 of this series, that's episode 161, which you can get at redpodcast.com/161. I've gotten a lot of great insights, stuff that I haven't picked up along the way, and also things that I haven't heard before, at least not said in this way. And as I'm sure that you know, sometimes the same message said in a different ways when it actually sticks for you. So if you're looking to get better at public speaking, this is an episode for you. And as I mentioned, this is part 2 of 2. So also check out redpodcast.com/161 if you haven't already done that. This is the Red Podcast, the podcast for influencers. If you're a blogger, podcaster, speaker, marketer, nonfiction author, or an entrepreneur, this is the podcast for you. The focus, how to take your idea, make a name for yourself, and make money. And there is no better way to do that than getting in front of people. It takes a long time to reach out to people if you're doing it one-on-one. Public speaking leverages your time, but lets you reach out to a lot of people at once. And if you look at the bloggers, podcasters, marketers that are really connecting with people online, they're doing it, strangely enough, and there's big irony in this, by getting offline. That's what this episode is all about. So continuing on the topic that we talked about in episode 161, Julie Austin, she's got a company called Speaker Sponsor. She had some great advice on knowing the audience. She says, I'm a professional speaker, and I run a site called Speaker Sponsor. By the way, Speaker Sponsor, it's an online directory for speakers seeking small business sponsorship. If you're interested in that, we'll have it linked from the episode notes. That's at redpodcast.com/162. She says, I learned the hard way that you have to know who your audience is and what they need in order to connect with them. Some of the feedback I got in the beginning were things like, she didn't understand what we do. That was for an HR audience, and I realized that it was true. I hadn't taken the time to research their industry. The next time I spoke at an HR conference, I read every industry magazine and online blog that I could find. It was especially helpful to read top industry leader blogs in that market to find out the latest information. I found out what their problems were and how I could help solve them. Julie's advice is to find out what the audience is complaining about and what keeps them up at night. She says, I plan and create my speeches and outlines after long conversations with the meeting planner to make sure that I'm covering the exact issues that they need covered. I have this conversation after doing my extensive research, so I have an idea of what I'm talking about and how I can help them. I'm going to add something to this. It's a marketing trick that I use to really connect with an audience, and that's to go to where the audience hangs out. Not necessarily an industry board, but where they're consuming products. For example, Amazon, the books that these people are reading, Yelp, the places that these people are going to. You'll find out how the specific audience talks, how they interact with each other, the words that they use. And then if you can find a way to bring the topics, the words, the feelings that they have in your speech, that's going to help you a lot. And speaking of connection, on a recorder, she says this, I connect with the audience by arriving ahead of time, chatting with participants and leaders, asking questions, and listening intently. Sometimes I can pick up a nugget or adjust my presentation according to what I've heard just prior to my presentation. That's also great advice. I've seen an embarrassing situation happen more than a couple of times where a speaker will come into an event, fly in the morning, fly out in the afternoon, not even spending an entire day at the event, certainly not the night before or the night after, to get to know the audience. And I've seen guys that will get up on stage, maybe it's a multi-speaker event, and just a couple of speakers afterwards get up and give the exact same joke that was heard in the same room by the same audience that morning. That's how out of touch people get. It's very easy to do that when you're doing multiple events per year, multiple events per week sometimes. It's easy to get lazy, to not prepare, to not know the audience. And this guy had no idea. Everybody's giving him what I'd call a courtesy laugh, but we're all looking around at each other. So now, this guy doesn't get us. And because of that, nobody's going to hire him. Nobody's going to listen to the rest of the message. It's a bad connection. So Henri says that. Arrive ahead of time, chat with participants and leaders, be part of the group, show people that you care, get up on stage, hang out afterwards. That's also a great way to connect. It's going to make your message that much more memorable because that's what we're trying to do, right? Have a memorable message, connect with people, and ultimately influence them. Bob Zietlinger, he's managing director of B2Z Communications. He says, I believe many people stumble because they think audience members are judging them when they present. To avoid this thinking, a presenter needs to do one or more of the following. 1, convince yourself that you know more than anyone in the room about the subject matter. 2, set expectations of audience reactions during the presentation. Don't expect a lot of nodding in agreement, but rather expect some straight faces that are focused on learning. This was a big lesson for me because before I was in the entertainment business, working on the marketing side of things, I was a musician myself. That's how I learned the business. And I was playing around the Southeast. I would go to a club. I would be up there on stage looking at the back of a room. I would see somebody lean over to the person he or she was with and say something. And they would look or they would point, say something more. I thought they were talking about me, so I would get real self-conscious. It would affect my performance. It's very vulnerable to be up on stage with just you and a guitar, even if you're in a full band. Very vulnerable. Musicians, while we'll get up on stage and seemingly not think anything of it, oftentimes very fragile egos, and I was certainly one of those people. I was up there pouring my heart out in my songs, and you'd see some people talking, and you thought that it was about you. Probably what the guy was doing was hitting on a woman. Maybe he was saying, hey, go get me a beer. Maybe he was looking for drugs. Who knows what was happening? Chances are, though, the conversation had nothing to do with me, yet I thought that it did. And this happens to speakers all the time. You're supposedly the entertainment. You're supposedly the expert. You're supposedly the reason that people are there. But people are there in the audience for a lot of reasons. A lot of them don't have anything to do with you. And it's easy to kind of mess with your mind and think that if something isn't going well, if people aren't paying attention, if somebody's laughing at inappropriate times, or maybe not laughing when they should be laughing, that it has something to do with you. And I think this is great advice by Bob, just to say, you've got to get your expectations in order. Not everybody is going to like what you do. Your job is to connect with the people that do like what you're doing and really get them to love you. Focus on the people that like you and get them to love you. You're not going to win over everybody. So don't ignore the people that like you. Don't ignore the people that love you, trying to get that one guy who's never going to come around. Good advice from Bob. We're going to have all these people linked, by the way, in the episode notes. That will be at redpodcast.com/162. Bob also gave me a great tip about soliciting the audience. He said, plan to solicit audience interaction. I always find speaker ratings are higher when audience participate during the presentations. Sometimes audiences participate and sometimes they don't. The key here is to build in questions and opportunities for audiences to participate if they want to. So after slide 4, for example, he would tell the audience his experience with something and then ask, has anyone had different experiences? I think this is a real honest yet vulnerable position. You're saying that not everything is this way. I think it opens it up to discussion. And because of that, the audience feels they're moving forward with you to a solution. So it's something that I would suggest trying in your next speech. Megan Interbrand, PR from ezanga.com. She says, talk to the crowd like you're already friends. You wouldn't talk to your friends in a lecture tone. You'd be more fluid and relaxed. Talking to someone in a bland, monotone lecture style is the first thing that makes me tune out. I completely agree. And it's something that is extremely difficult. Even now, me talking to you when it's just me is different from when I've got somebody here in the red room and I'm having a conversation with them. It's a co-hosted situation or I'm doing an interview. It's the same thing when you're in front of a room, just you and the microphone. It's easy to get into a radio broadcaster or auctioneer type mode. Sometimes you want to keep it down. I found that it's good, though, if you can not have the energy too high all the time, not have the energy too low all the time. If you can work with going up, down, that's another way to keep the audience on their toes. But agree with Megan, talk to the crowd as if you're already friends. That's a great tip when you're just meeting people. Act like you already know them. You're going to build that instant rapport. It's certainly great during interviews if you're trying to connect with somebody who's interviewing you. The recording button is on. It's easy to get nervous. Talk to somebody as if you already know him. Try that. Let me know how it works for you. @DavidHooper is how to reach me on Twitter. If you're a podcaster yourself, you're a speaker, you've probably seen a lot of people that seem to invite controversy. And Matt Hallisey, he's a founder of something called the Negotiator's Playbook, had something to say about that. He said, in order to really connect with an audience and get their attention and focus, you need to be bold and controversial. You have to have a topic that will polarize your audience. When most of your audience is either massively intrigued or thinks you're nuts, then you'll have a captive audience. It's at this point you'll have the opportunity to effectively communicate your message. I agree with Matt that there's no money in the middle. Turn on any kind of right-wing talk radio, Sean Hannity, Limbaugh, Glenn Beck. You're going to see that they're being controversial. Is it just for controversy's sake? That I don't know about, but there's something to be said that there is no money in the middle. Fly your flag, whether it's the Confederate flag or the gay pride flag. Be who you are and don't try to please everybody. Being in radio, I can tell you that there are people that listen to Rush Limbaugh, that listen to Sean Hannity, that listen to Dave Ramsey just because they hate them so much. You'll get the hater listeners. Do you necessarily want that? I don't know. Do you want it at a live event? Maybe not. But at the same time, if you're just looking for ratings, if you're looking to get your advertising dollars up there, if you're looking for publicity, ultimately trying to get your message out, that may help you. Controversy is one way to help that along. Let's talk about humor. Bob Corbett, Corbett Public Relations, he talks about being funny. He said, watch out for being funny or sarcastic. For some people, humor just does not work. Practice your jokes or funny lines ahead of time. You don't want to be remembered as the good speaker who had bad jokes or, quote unquote, tried to be funny. So true. We've seen guys try to connect by being funny. And humor is one of those things that I think it's like being controversial. I think you want to play the edges. I think that's what makes humor funny. If you're going to go somewhere in the middle, probably not as much. People just kind of give you a groan and it's not really going to be memorable. I think it's better to go way out on the edges. And if you're going to say something that's maybe a little off color, do it. But know that you're going to piss some people off. Not everybody's going to think it's funny, even if it's the cleanest of jokes. And like I mentioned about connecting with an audience, sometimes you're going to tell a joke, and there's some common jokes that get told around on the speaking circuit. You've got to be careful where you get your material. You've got to be careful who's listening to you that might take your material, because sometimes, especially if you do these multi-speaker events, the same jokes are going to be told. And just like Bob says here, the guy who tried to be funny, the guy who tried to use the joke that the last guy did, even if it's his joke in the first place, is always going to come in second. He's always going to be the non-original guy of the two. If you've got questions or comments about public speaking, I want to hear them. Reach out to me. David Hooper is my Twitter username. We've got something called the Red Insiders. If you want to get better at public speaking, if you want to get better at influence, reaching your audience, I've got 20 years in the entertainment, influence, book publishing, getting your message out there business. Red Insiders is free. Go to redpodcast.com for more information about that. Happy to get with you on the phone, talk about growing your influence and growing your business. If you like Red Podcast, I'd also appreciate if you would tell a friend. That will help us to spread the word. This was part 2 of a 2-part series. If you haven't heard part 1 yet, go to redpodcast.com/161 for that. And to make sure you never miss an episode, when you're at redpodcast.com, be sure to subscribe. You can do that via iTunes or your favorite RSS reader. Every episode that I do, it'll come down the line. You'll get it automatically. You can listen to it at your own convenience. Coming up next on Red Podcast, episode 163, I'll be talking about how much to share on social media. A lot of guys are sharing a lot of stuff. Some people, not so much. Is there a middle ground? That's what I'll be talking about. Thanks for subscribing. Thanks for listening. And I'll see you on the next episode of the Red Podcast.
You've been listening to Red Podcast, Real Entrepreneur Development. Subscribe today using iTunes, Stitcher, or via RSS at redpodcast.com.